When I was at summer camp, around 5th or 6th grade, I was having an impassioned argument with one of the other campers. Now, he had told us about this ride that they were supposedly building at Disneyland. And I told him there was no way that they could be building it. I knew I was wrong he was wrong because it just didn't make any sense. Because he said that they were going to be building an Indiana Jones ride. And I knew that didn't make any sense because Indiana Jones was not a Disney movie. And we argued about this for a while, and he insisted that he had seen a sign for it, but I knew he was right because I had the facts on my side. He was probably just making it up. Now, if you've been to Disneyland in the past 25 years, you know how this story turns out. Well, imagine my surprise when a few months later I was visiting Disneyland, and there in Adventureland was a sign announcing the coming attraction, the Indiana Jones Adventure, Temple of the Forbidden Eye. Now, I wasn't just surprised, I felt sheepish, embarrassed. Even though the only person I had to admit I was wrong to was myself. Another camper wasn't there, and I would probably never see him again. But I just remember how certain I was at the time, only to realize that the whole time I had been playing the fool. Now, I don't know what I would have said had he been there at that moment. I wasn't particularly good about admitting my mistakes at that point. I would have probably justified why it was a reasonable mistake to make in the first place. It wasn't the first time I was wrong. That may have been when I was convinced that in the song Frosty the Snowman, the traffic cop yallered stop, not hollered. The traffic cop yallered stop. I know, Mom and Dad. And it certainly wouldn't be the last. You see, because we humans are wrong all the time, it's one of the defining features of humanity. As the 18th century poet Alexander Pope wrote, "To err is human." And I mean, 1200 years before Descartes claimed, cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am, St. Augustine wrote, fallor ergo sum, I err, therefore I am. And the thing about being wrong is that most of the time that we think we're wrong, most of the time that we are wrong, we're sure we're totally right. You know, in fact, it's been demonstrated that people with the lowest abilities or knowledge or skill rate themselves as having just as much ability or knowledge as skill as those, rate themselves as highly as those who are experts. It's what's known as the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is based on the research of social psychologists David Dunning and Justin Kruger. You may have heard of it recently because there's been a good deal of discussion about its effect in politics since 2016. And the idea behind it is because people don't have enough knowledge or skill to accurately assess their ability or lack thereof. And so it's only when we develop a skill or knowledge that we know enough to know there's a lot that we don't know. And this was illustrated beautifully for me a couple years ago when I was playing a game of chess with an 8-year-old. Now, she told me she was really good at chess and that she always beat her parents and her grandmothers, so they don't even like to play with her anymore. Well, I had my doubts. Now, I know I'm pretty good at chess. When I used to play the Chess with Friends app, I would win most of the games, but I also know I'm not that good. You see, I once went to a regional chess competition in middle school, and I lost 3 of my games and drew on the 4th. The only reason our middle school team ended up winning the competition was because one of my classmates, Justin, was a chess prodigy, so I knew about where I stood in the rankings of chess skill. Well, I was pretty confident that this 8-year-old was not as good as me. But I figured I would go easy on her, maybe give her a few tips, maybe even let her win. What I learned, however, is that the reason she regularly won is because she didn't fully understand the rules, and she would just move her pieces as she saw fit. And she was not interested in hearing that she was playing wrong. And then I realized, I understood the real reason why her parents and grandmothers didn't want to play with her anymore. But of course, it's not just about little kids, although they can make a great example. Another example that really sticks out for me are those people, and many of you have seen it, those people who try out for shows like American Idol or The Voice, who have absolutely no idea that they have no place being on a singing condition, and perform miserably, and then are completely shocked or outraged when they are told so. It's also the reason that 88% of drivers rate themselves as above average. Or in a study that found that 30 to 40% of computer programmers rated themselves in the top 5% in the companies they worked at. Now, as Bertrand Russell, the 20th century philosopher, logician, and activist wrote, the whole problem with the world is that fools and fanatics are always so certain of themselves, and wiser people so full of doubts. Now, I'm sure that many of you are nodding your head in agreement, if only those people, but would you like some help off your high horse? Because the Dunning-Kruger effect is not so much a reminder that other people are foolishly wrong, it's that we are. Everyone estimates their abilities in some areas. Maybe logical reasoning or driving, musicianship, financial management, social intelligence, math, conducting science experiments, or playing chess. And it's not really about our ego blinding ourselves to our deficits. It's that we don't know enough to realize that we are absolutely inept. You know, even a brilliant man like Bertrand Russell had his blind spots. And it's a reminder to me that we all need some humility. We're all wrong sometimes, or really a lot of the time. It's why I now find myself, after I'm speculating about something with great conviction, that I've learned the importance of ending with, but I'm just speculating, and I may be completely wrong about all of this. I find it's a really useful way to end one of my pontifications on a subject in which I am not an expert. Because I do, and I think this is particularly true for men more than women, of just like giving that air of authority, of unearned authority. And so I've learned to know, to challenge that and point it out. And isn't it better to avoid, to acknowledge that and to avoid being wrong? Because, it feels awful to be wrong, doesn't it? Who likes being wrong? Catherine Schultz, author of the book Being Wrong, Adventures in the Margin of Error, points out that, actually, being wrong doesn't feel bad. Being wrong feels like being right. It's only when we realize that we're wrong that we feel bad. She describes it like one of those old Warner Brothers cartoons of Wile E. Coyote and the Roadrunner. Being wrong is Wile E. Coyote running off the cliff and not realizing that there isn't ground underneath him. Realizing you're wrong is when you start to fall. But if everybody is wrong all the time, why does it bother us so much to be wrong? We're all wrong. We're all guilty of it so many, countless times in our lives. And Schultz suggests that it's rooted in early experiences of school, when you get that spelling test back and it's all marked up with red and that big red F. So, she says, by the time you're 9 years old, you've already learned, first of all, that people who get stuff wrong are lazy, irresponsible dimwits. And second of all, that the way to succeed in life is to never make any mistakes. Now, according to this, getting something wrong means that there's something wrong with us. So we just insist that we're right, because it makes us feel smart and responsible and virtuous and safe. And that's why I really appreciate what David said about the importance of teachers admitting that they're wrong. Because it shows kids that being wrong is actually okay. You know, I remember my algebra teacher would let you could get points back by correcting your mistakes on last week's test. You know, because it emphasizes that learning and developing our skills is more important than being right. From the place where we are right, flowers will never grow in the spring. Now, science, specifically the scientific method, teaches us the importance of being wrong. Because if we weren't ever able to make a conjecture or a hypothesis and then test it out and risk being wrong, then we would never learn anything. Science requires accepting the possibility of being wrong. As Bertrand Russell wrote, every scientist whose outlook is truly scientific is ready to admit that what passes for scientific knowledge at the moment is sure to require correction with the progress of discovery. Unfortunately, scientists who believe they're right sometimes undertake flawed studies that will prove their hypothesis correct, whether it actually is or not. And then you end up with bad science, and that can have real harmful world consequences, such as the debunked research linking vaccines to autism, or faulty pharmaceutical trials, which give bad information about how drugs work, or the pseudosciences, which purported to show that white people were superior to other racial groups and allowed for all kinds of unjust laws and practices. And the thing is, it's not often done with a conscious attempt to produce bad scientists. You know, like in the way that industries pay for research that would cast doubt on, say, the dangers of smoking or sugar or cell phones or the causes of global warming. Oftentimes, the bias is unconscious and the mistakes unintentional. And that's why I thought it was great when I heard about this recently launched Loss of Confidence project. And it's this project where researchers in the field of psychology can announce that they have lost confidence in the conclusions of their past research, either because they found a flaw or because no one else has been able to replicate it. You know, that's how we change, that's how we grow, that's how we learn. And so being willing to be wrong is so powerful. Think for a moment about what it means to feel right, says Schultz. It means you think that your beliefs just perfectly reflect reality. And when you feel that way, you've got a problem to solve, which is, how are you going to explain that? How are you going to explain to all of those people who disagree with you? The first thing we usually do when someone disagrees with us is we just assume they're ignorant. They just don't have access to the same information that we do, and when we generously share that information with them, they're going to see the light and come on over to our team. And when that doesn't work, when it turns out those people have all the same facts that we do, and they still disagree with us, then we move on to a second assumption, which is that they're idiots. They have all the right pieces of the puzzle, and they are too moronic to put them together correctly. And when that doesn't work, when it turns out that people who disagree with us have all the same facts that we do and are actually pretty smart, then we move on to a third assumption, that they know the truth and they are deliberately distorting it for their own malevolent purposes. My first thought about all of this is the old adage, when arguing with a fool, first make sure the other person isn't doing the same thing. But my second thought is, doesn't our religion teach us about open-mindedness? Of knowing that we don't have all of the answers, or that some questions may have more than one right answer. And the right answer might vary from person to person. Doesn't our religion teach us to keep seeking out truths? Considering that, Unitarian Universalist minister Nancy MacDonald Ladd, in her book Good News, Progressive Faith Beyond Optimism, finds it a little bothersome that, as she says, us righteous do-gooders with open minds and loving hearts and welcoming hands can be so utterly and damnably sure of ourselves. She recalls walking the halls of her Unitarian Universalist seminary and regularly encountering people who were just so certain they were right about stuff. Lots of stuff. About theology, sure. The existence or non-existence of God was a favorite topic of highly assured debate. But it wasn't just that, she says. People also seemed curiously certain about a whole lot of other things too, like geopolitics and wine and meditation, and about how nobody should ever eat at McDonald's. Sometimes, she says, I felt that my fellow Unitarian Universalists moved in the world as if everyone else was just about to break through and come around to their perspective on all of these important things, especially that bit about McDonald's. And that's the real kicker of it, she says. You see, most of the time, then and now, I didn't really disagree with many of the perspectives of my self-assured fellow progressives. What was challenging to me among my liberal religious compatriots was not the analysis of any given situation. Rather, it was the utter certitude with which everyone seemed to hold these ideas. Now, I went to a different seminary than Nancy, but she may as well have been talking about me. I have lots of thoughts and opinions very strongly held, and at the same time, I try to be skeptical, to hold my views lightly, to look out, to just be aware, to try to be conscious of those biases that I have, to hold my views lightly and really be open to change. Although, since it's October Sunday, I will categorically state that Crash should never have won Best Picture. It should have gone to Brokeback Mountain or Capote. Even Crash's writer-director Paul Haggis has said that it wasn't the best film of the year. That's one of my own little... I'm sure about that one. But I do. I try to be open to change, to new perspectives. But it's a constant struggle. And I know that my biases still inflect my worldview, especially when I don't notice that it's happening, and inflect my worldview in the way I perceive things. And, to take an example, when it comes to racial justice, this fact can be in the way of a lot. Those of us who are white in this country have been socialized to believe that our perspective is accurate, that unlike people of color, we are impartial observers. That we have a neutral opinion, and people of color have a self-interested opinion that can't be trusted. And of course, that's not true. We all have our perspectives that we come from. But doing that takes unlearning. And really that can rattle us, because it requires upending so many assumptions that we made around the world, that we make about the world and how we live our lives. And it's challenging, but that's the only way we can create new possibilities, new life. Doubts and loves dig up the world like a mole, a plow, and a whisper will be heard in the place where the ruined house once stood. Thankfully, Nancy MacDonald Ladd says, our tradition teaches us that there is a deep and abiding truth in many paths, and that it is possible not only that we may individually be wrong on a number of issues, great and small, but also that our way is not the right way or the only way for any number of partners and companions we will meet along the journey. We actually believe in a diversity of perspectives. We actually believe in theological difference. I think many of us might resonate with this Peanuts cartoon. For those of you who can't read it, I hear you're writing a book on theology. I hope you have a good title. I have the perfect title, Snoopy says. Has it ever occurred to you that you might be wrong? At our best, we don't profess lukewarm toleration while secretly believing everyone else ought to be just like us. Uniquely among faith traditions, says Nancy MacDonald Ladd, we don't have to operate under the illusion that we've got a corner on the market of truth. In fact, it is the center of that humility where all of our deepest work and most profound growth is possible. That's what our covenant calls us to. The way we choose to be together invites us, first of all, to listen, to understand, rather than to judge and prove a point. To assume good intentions, to meet each other with respect of taking one another with the respect of taking one another seriously. We are each more fragile than all of the certainties we might perform for one another, she says. None of us is in possession of all the wisdom we will need to survive. We are all of us so desperately in need of each other's empathy and compassion that the absence of it could be our undoing. And the gift of not being so sure, of coming home to a theology of humility which says you do not have to have it all figured out, and which invites you to lean over the edge of all you do not know, is right here every day. You just have to be willing to cherish your doubts, to be willing to be wrong. It's kind of a strange way to end the sermon, to invite you to be willing to be wrong. And yet, there is so much power there.